In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. George Orwell. There's a familiar but perhaps apocryphal story about Bertrand Russell, the influential 20th century philosopher and activist, at a dinner party. He was seated next to an attractive young woman to whom he turned and asked, "Would you be willing to go to bed with me if I gave you $2 million?" The woman looked at Russell appraisingly and said, $2 million? Yes, I would." Then Russell asked, "Would you sleep with me for $20? Taken aback, the woman responded, "What do you think I am, a common prostitute?" Russell responded, "Madam, that has already been established. Now we're just haggling about the price." 1984 is about many things. From our perspective, one of the most important is the importance of inquiry. What is a society like in which the range of allowable questions is restricted to the most mundane and quotidian facts? In our terminology, 1984 describes a culture in which double-loop learning is prohibited, educationally, psychologically, linguistically, and, if necessary, physically. It's a society in which shared cultural models, the principles of Ingsoc, have become calcified and immune from revision or challenge. They are self-reinforcing beliefs that brook no criticism or question. And from this, I would argue, the horror follows. One central principle, strict and uncompromising orthodoxy, yields everything else. This principle generates in its wake a society in which unquestioning advocacy and acceptance replaces curiosity and change. It's a society in which ideology drives out reason and reflection. It is ultimately a world in which nature itself gives way to artifice, and the individual to the collective will of the party. In many ways, 1984 is an illustration writ very large of themes that have threaded through all of our discussions this semester. What happens when we hold basic principles immune from examination and inquiry? What happens when we refuse to question those assumptions on the basis of which we live? 1984 not only tells us what the end of inquiry means, it also tells us how it can be achieved. Part of the power of 1984 is the realization that the society Orwell envisions is not a horrible fairy tale. It is a possible future and, in some ways, an actual present. Start from the basic tenet of orthodoxy. Doctrine is always correct. In 1984, that doctrine takes the form of the principles of Ingsoc, in the words of Big Brother. It follows from this that if the leader says something that appears to be in conflict with other alleged evidence, we must find a way to make that evidence compliant with our fundamental beliefs, those guiding mental models that inform our world. Let's consider a recent film, Good Night and Good Luck, against this background. The film tells the story of Senator Joe McCarthy's hunt for communists from the perspective of Edward R. Murrow and the CBS News team. Part of McCarthy's view included his own commitment to and infallibility in uncovering communists in the government. These were precepts about which inquiry were not permitted. As a result, from this perspective, any evidence that called into question his intentions or his methods was thereby suspect. The inquiry itself needed to be re-explained within the allowable framework of assumptions. The film demonstrates precisely how this works. It also highlights some of the pressures that would make a Murrow-style defense against these tactics even more difficult today. McCarthyism, like Ingsoc, or any other variety of extreme orthodoxy, is a self-sustaining system. Its goal is to prevent, or at least disarm, any inquiry that could in any way undermine its stability. Any view that holds its most basic principles immune from examination is in the same position as Russell's dinner acquaintance. It's orthodoxy. It's just haggling over the price. Once inquiry ends, we're on the road to 1984. To bring all of this even closer to home, consider a comment by David Denby on the film The Road to Guantanamo, a recent film about three real-life British nationals held for 2 years at the American military prison in Cuba. In discussing the portrayal of the guards, Denby observes, quote, "Their attitude is that the prisoners are guilty by definition. Guilty because they have been captured and sent to Guantanamo. Like Soviet interrogators during the purges of the 1930s, they need to force a confession out of their charges in order to prove that the government hasn't made a mistake. The prisoners aren't allowed the slightest authority as human beings, and certainly not the authority of innocence." The underlying principle that cannot be questioned here, as in 1984, is the absolute authority and infallibility of the government. It's not surprising, therefore, that the results we've seen and read about in Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, and other facilities erected on this ideology of orthodoxy look eerily similar to those already encountered in the Ministry of Truth. From orthodoxy, all else follows. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. 1984 echoes, emphasizes, and consolidates other material we've discussed this semester. Consider its relation to Lenny in Memento. It's not a long stretch to think of 1984 as Lenny writ large, a kind of corporate or collective version of Lenny. 1984 is a society that has few core precepts, with no ability or will to create new memories. The past, history, is what's written, and what's written derives directly from the immutable precepts that can never be questioned. Lenny's alteration of his past, his burning his photo, writing "Don't believe his lies" on the photo, is a piece with Winston's work in the Ministry of Truth. The only difference is that Lenny's doublethink is automatic due to his anterior grade amnesia. Winston's, the party's, is voluntary. Again, 1984 was beyond a doubt a culture of fear. As discussed in, quote, the book, by which I mean Goldstein's track on the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism, fear is an essential part of the mechanism for maintaining the social hierarchy in 1984 and subverting inquiry. The constant state of war, after all, war is peace, not only serves an economic end, it also keeps the party members focused on things that ultimately make no difference. It allows the party to channel their hate, their instincts, and their passions in a non-threatening direction. It keeps them focused on side effects rather than root causes of the desperate conditions and the grinding poverty in which they live.